Hello, and welcome to this no-pressure edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I am your newly famous host, Joe Johnson, owner of Purple PTSD.
Who?
Vikings
Why are you famous?
You didn't hear the show blew up. We're all famous now. So quit your day jobs.
I'm absolutely not going to do that.
Okay. Well, it was a good...
I already did!
Whoops. Well, that sums up the show. Yeah. I'm just excited because we've been doing our show for a while, and it's been the same three of us through thick and thin. Mr. Joe Oberle of purplePTSD.com and thesportspost.com. He's been here with me on this show and the show that we had previous to this that I still have nightmares about. How are you doing, man?
I'm sleeping better now that we're on this show, Joe. So just like you.
You know. And that's Luke, Mr. Luke Braun.
I'm loving these subtweets, these live audio subtweets.
Yeah. You can sort of get the how I write my articles with the 50 parentheses per.
I'm still trying to figure out exactly what a subreddit is and a subtweet. And
you know, they're completely different things.
Yeah.
Really?
Isn't that a subreddit is just a subdivision of the site reddit.com, a popular social media and link aggregation site. A subtweet is when you tweet something very cryptic that is probably directed at someone, but you don't actually tag them in it, like what Stephon Diggs does on Twitter constantly.
Oh my God, that's my livelihood. I do that all the time.
And it's funny because we obviously, despite all the evidence to the contrary, we do plan for this show, and the number one thing on our agenda was explain the internet to Joe Oberle.
It's the off season. It's February.
Oh, it's getting weird early.
It should be. We had to move it up so I could understand the rest of the broadcast. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And now all our similarly geriatric listeners will be able to understand as well.
I'm not a digital native. All right, I'm not a digital native. You guys are.
That's totally our target market too. It's the retired folk. How are you guys doing though? This is obviously our first show. The last show that we did kind of summed up the Super Bowl a little bit and some of the end of the season Viking stuff. So this is really clearly our first off-season show where we can kind of kick back, take all sorts of different random allergy medications, drink some beers, and kind of look at the team from a different perspective. So just in general, how are you guys feeling?
I'm good. Did you introduce Luke?
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I didn't mention he writes for Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory. And check out the Pocket Protectors. It's on Purple PTSD now. We're integrating. We know what we're doing.
It's also on Climbing the Pocket.
And I had a guest post on Vikings Territory, so officially you got to put that in there for me now. Come on,
look at that.
Come on.
I know. There's just been so many moves I can't even keep up with them, but we're kind of, I guess I should have, instead of just asking generally how you're doing in terms of life, in terms of the Vikings or football in general, it just seems like the quarterback situation. I'll be honest, I'm supposed to, my role outside of just keeping the lights on is just kind of covering it for Purple PTSD, just the daily news tidbits and kind of integrating my emotional health in regards to that. Are you guys tired of this quarterback stuff yet, or are you still?
Absolutely not.
Yes, and that's why I wrote a piece contrary to that this week for PTSD, because there are other things to do, but we can get into that. No, the quarterback, right now, it just continues to be the same stuff rehashed by somebody else, and somebody has a rumor and they throw it up there, hint, hint, and everybody else takes off on it, and it's just like...
That was a subtweet, by the way.
I don't want to say anything nasty.
That was, if you tweeted that would be a subtweet. It was a sub-podcast. So,
I'm excited about it. I'm a little nervous, but, boy, some of the stuff you see out there, you just shake your head at, and I said, that's not happening. That's not happening. And, it's fun, the speculation. It's where more people love football now because they can speculate and throw things out there and hope they're right. And I'm not one of them.
Totally.
There's like 7 different people that could be our starting quarterback in 2018.
Yep.
And I don't know why, but I just love thinking about that and breaking them down and comparing and contrasting. There's just so many different fun options, and they're all really weird. We're probably going to end up with a quarterback competition between 2 people, and we have no idea which 2 people. And I think that, I don't know, it's really fun from just a fan perspective, because I don't care about the rumors, and I don't really pay much attention to them, because usually, unless it's like Adam Schefter or somebody like Courtney
Johnson.
Cronin or Ben Gessling that's super plugged in, I don't care about what Roto World says about who Case Keenum's agent went to a steakhouse with. Who cares? But I love thinking about who it should be and what would happen if we had A.J. McCarron and Case Keenum or what would happen. Somebody talked about franchise tagging Case Keenum and then drafting Lamar Jackson, and I was like, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. What would that be like? What would the competition look like?
Another Louisville guy?
Kill me now.
I do feel like as the guy that you would think would be super into this stuff, I think it's a weird balance between. I do agree with you, Joe, that this is a lot of people who don't really follow the team that much love the speculation because it gives them something to talk about at work or with other people, and it's like a male bonding thing. But beyond that, I think the Vikings, at least in all of our lifetimes, really have never won anything. So it's more fun in the offseason to say, you're putting a Madden team together or a fantasy team, saying, well, look how good we'd be. Imagine how great we'd be with this person.
Fantasy team. It's true. Vikings are going to have 10 quarterbacks in their training camp in Egan.
I wouldn't hate it.
I've always been that guy, more so with wide receivers, obviously. I've been a huge wide receiver nerd. This, I pick up this just in what you're saying, Joe, is it makes me anxious just because of the uncertainty and how much I'm looking at the window of opportunity that this team has and what this decision will do to dictate whether or not they can make it further than they did last year. So when I look at something, just real quick, when I look at something like, A.J. McCarron or even bringing back Case Keenum, I don't see how that would help us beat the Eagles, who will have Carson Wentz back and a bunch of new draft picks and everything. So I want something that lights my fire. That's been my argument with the Kirk Cousins thing this entire time. So I just wondered what you guys.
I can give you a rule of thumb to parse guys like Keenum and McCarron that are very unexciting but available, and it's that I think the Vikings definitely need a floor at quarterback. And I think if you pick a guy that you think has the highest ceiling, be it one of the draft picks or Teddy or whatever you think it is, most of those guys also have a very low floor. If you have Teddy Bridgewater, he has a very low floor in that, oh my God, he can't even function anymore. So you need somebody in there to be kind of your safety net. And that's what I look at a guy like Case Keenum. If Case Keenum is our safety net, I'm thrilled with that. And A.J. McCarron, I'm not quite sure what I think of him yet, but I think he's another guy that you get because he's your safety net. He's, okay, we can't be worse than Josh McCown. And if we can't do worse than Josh McCown, then I feel a lot better about taking a risk with somebody like Teddy or a draft pick.
I hope we're not looking going just for a floor when the Vikings are this close to get this level. But that's beside the point. But
I think you go for a guy with a ceiling.
That is a good point, though.
It's that none of those guys are sure things.
I think
you can go get a rookie, and maybe he's dynamic and this huge playmaker, but you don't have a guy like a Drew Brees that is that guy. So you go out and get somebody that to pair with them, and then you have them compete. So we're going to have a quarterback competition. I'm almost sure that we're going to have a quarterback competition. Unless it's Kirk Cousins specifically is the only guy I don't think would come with a quarterback competition, and it's just because his contract is going to be so insane.
Well, I think you guys are making two different arguments, and it was good, Luke, that you kind of explained that a little bit more, because basically Luke's saying if Teddy, for example, his leg explodes again, at least we have somebody behind him that can get us through playoffs.
Right. Get your guy that wins you the Super Bowl, and then get your guy that backs it up.
I just don't think that they think that way. But what bothers me about all this speculation this time of year is that you had 3 decent quarterbacks, quote unquote, on your team this year. And all this stuff is swirling all around, and it starts affecting them. And you're starting to say, then they start looking the other way. I mean, I loved what the Vikings had going with their quarterbacks this year. Case Keenum played balls to the walls just to, because he was, he wanted that starting position. He wanted everything he got. And you got Teddy, who's just grinding to get in there. And now you got Teddy saying, well, I'm going to start somewhere. And then this, all this stuff starts happening. It's like, the team chemistry that they had going this year, which is a big part of why they're successful, just starts to splinter away. And I know this is a real non-analytical, numerical thing. It's more, touchy-feely, human beings. But that, that's you need that chemistry at this level to really a team that's all in there pulling together. And I think they had that this year. And all this stuff about all these names, the Vikings are looking at this guy and that guy and this guy coming in, just like Teddy's going, I'm out of here, whatever. But so that's what bothers me.
I mean, you'll have like 4 months after the decision is made. The decision gets made in mid-March. You're gonna have 4 months before they even get together for all that to calm down and be forgotten.
Yeah, but it just bugs me.
I did send a link out, and I don't want to have everything go back to Kirk Cousins. We talked about this pretty in depth last week, so if people want to hear our takes on that, check out the show last week. It'll be on the podcast page on both
There's
sites.
also an article that I wrote on Purple PTSD called Kirk Cousins is a Bad Idea.
Yep, and then I wrote about 6 articles explaining my love for Kirk Cousins, so you can see that. I injected it into everything, even like training camp stuff. Oh, by the way, did you know? But it does look like, from the rumors anyway, from the ones that I wrote about anyway, that Keenum's going to be the guy. They're not going to franchise tag anybody, but basically Charlie Walters, the Pioneer Press, wrote that if they can't get Keenum to sign, then they're going to go after McCarron. Joe, I think it's a good time to kind of ask about the article you wrote about, which is, let's ignore the quarterback situation. Where can the team improve outside of that? There still is a team that, on paper, it looks pretty good. They got to, fix some stuff on the offensive line. They got, obviously, some draft day shenanigans are going to go down with Spielman and all the trades he makes. He's probably going to end up with 9 picks again. Do you want to kind of talk about what pieces you identified there and sort of...
Well, it was a real thumbnail thing. I ran down the roster from different positions and saying, with all the bluster at quarterback that I just expressed my feelings about, there's other things of question here, and it should be interesting to see what they do, because as we know, no team stays the same, from one season to the next. They get started with tight end. Kyle Rudolph is the guy. They need somebody behind him to catch passes. I like David Morgan as their blocking tight end, but they need to bring somebody in behind him, because he's going to turn 29 and he's good. He's still at his prime, but he's always had injury trouble, so you never know what's going to happen. Running back Jerick McKitton's going to bolt, I suspect, to go start somewhere, and so you got to backfill that position. And I just went down the list and talked about where I think where they're at and where they probably need to go. So with only 5 draft picks, you're going to have to do either a bit of gambling there or trading, or else they're going to have to get really active in free agency. So should be interesting offseason.
Yeah, there is. If they don't kind of spend their whole opportunity, if they don't spend all of their cash on the quarterback position, there are a lot of interesting ways they can use that money elsewhere, even after accounting for the extensions that will probably happen in the summer.
Yeah, I was asking Joe's article, because I sent you guys this article before we got on the air from Sports Illustrated that basically pointed out, not to get back to Cousins again, but why Cousins makes the most sense in Minnesota, just because he's more of an elite system guy that you plug in, not someone you build around like the Browns would need. And they talked about the Vikings and said that the only thing that the Vikings offense is missing is like an Alvin Kamara type guy that you can plug into different places that can hurt defenses, creatively. And I was wondering, Luke, if you had anybody in mind that might fit that role, either
at running back?
Yeah, or maybe like a Randall Cobb, like a Randall Cobb type, more like a guy that gets 8 to 10 touches a game. That just like a small receiver.
Jerick McKinnon would be that guy too. Although I don't think
that's what I was thinking.
I don't think. I just looking at what the market would give to him, I think his interest in just staying in the hometown would probably wane. That's how I approach a lot of these things, is looking at so if I were Jerick McKinnon, would I want to test the mark? Absolutely. People are going to bid over him a lot, so he's not staying. But I look at a guy like Darren Sproles could be someone like that. I mean, he's old, but he's still definitely got it. There's about 306 of those guys in the draft, too, that you could probably get one in the 5th round, and they could come in and immediately replace Jerick McKinnon, even though they probably wouldn't be as good. I love Jerick McKinnon, but he could fill that role.
Think like me that he's making a mistake if he goes to one. I understand the desire to do that, but I think in his role with Dalvin Cook in this offense, and you bring in McKinnon as the change of pace back, and who can catch the ball, and he can even run the ball as well. So it's like I don't see him as the Vikings in all the years that he's been here have never made him a number 1 back, and
he's been forced to be.
Pardon me.
He was forced to be.
Yes,
for
1
a couple years,
and it wasn't great, But I think he's just I understand the desire to want to do that. You feel your career's wasting away, but I think personally this is the right spot for him because he could be that Alvin Kamara type guy. He kind of is if you got Dalvin Cook in there, and then you got your goal line back, and they would be set at this position if he decided to stick around.
Yeah, he's extremely expensive for his role, and I don't like paying running backs as a general rule of thumb. And you can, if you listen to the Pocket Protectors as of late, we talk a lot about how running backs are not really ever worth any investment because they're so replaceable. But Jerick McKinnon is extremely talented, and if used in the proper role, I actually think Tampa Bay is an interesting landing spot for him because they just cut Doug Martin, and right now Jaquiz Rodgers and I think Charles Sims are the only – Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber and Jaquiz Rodgers are the only running backs on their roster right now. So they have a gaping hole there, and definitely I could see them paying Jerick McKinnon. And I don't know, if you make $2 extra million, do you really care if you maybe had to run between the tackles too much?
Yeah, but what even without, unless you're a guy like Dalvin Cook, what is a starting running back these days? He shared time here. He shared, you got the 2 guys in Atlanta. You got, you never knew who was going to be the main guy in New England. I mean, a lot of really good teams.
Ezekiel Elliott or Gurley or bust.
Yes, exactly. So that's my point. So I don't know what he's doing, but his agent is probably.
You have to be one of those blue chip like Saquon Barkley coming out in the draft this year. You have to be one of those guys to really get like a number 1 job. Like Dalvin Cook, I would say, was one of those guys last year. So I don't think Jerick McKinnon could ever. I don't think he's going to be a number 1 truly. Like he's not going to get 80% of the carries anywhere. Nobody does that anymore.
His body wouldn't hold up anyway. There's just no way.
You got to look at rationally, like you said, what running between the tackles would do to his body and his career versus what he could basically do in Minnesota for the extra amount of years just in that role. But there's a lot of
I don't think any team would do that to anyone unless they had like a Saquon Barkley that like was their guy that they spent a lot on, and I don't think anybody would make him do that.
Well, hopefully, Jerick McKinnon is one of those new listeners we had last week, Joe, and he's listening to this show. So.
Well, I think wherever he goes, he'll be a strong contributor, and like the team that gets him will definitely be happy with him in terms of the amount that they ask him to do. I don't know if they turn him into their Gurley or whatever, though.
What do you guys think about the talk about since everything goes back to Kirk Cousins?
Jesus.
The contract, the theory that a team that doesn't necessarily want to invest a ton of money into him over, X amount of years with the way contracts are typically set up is they're backloaded and then they end up cutting the guy or basically having salary cap problems. Teams like the Jets who have a lot of room, there's been talk of them basically dumping a large chunk of his salary into the first year of his contract, so like $60 million for the first year, and then, a manageable amount after that to add players to that. Do you guys, and especially Luke, 'cause I know you've looked into this stuff before, is that even a realistic thing that could happen?
Sure.
And if so, is there any room for the Vikings to do that? Maybe not this year, but next year?
The Vikings currently have, it depends on the rest of the details of the contract, right? Because you would assume if they pay $60 million, which is a ridiculous number, up front, that the number after that is a lot lower. But that's a tougher thing to get the player to agree to. Because, okay, you'll make $60 million right away, and then what? I'm going to spend 3 years making like 15 a pop when I could be making 25 a pop over in Denver? So I don't know if you could get them to agree to that, but that would be the idea, is to front load the whole thing while we have the cap room now, and then you get all your money you were going to get, and then we have you as cheap as we want later when we want to build a roster around you. That's what they would want to do. If the Vikings were to make a ploy for Kirk Cousins, they would probably, because here's the deal, they don't have the spending power that the Jets and the Browns do. They just cannot outbid. They cannot win a bidding war. This is like when we wanted to go get Kelechi Osemele and Oakland just had more money. Like, there's just no way we're going to do it. But if we wanted to try to get Kirk Cousins, for one, it would require the fact that he wants to play in Minnesota to mean he's willing to decline probably an 8-figure difference in the total contract number. He would have to be willing to take significantly less money to play in Minnesota. We'd probably have to guarantee most of it just to compete with those bigger numbers. So you would have a long-term guaranteed contract with Kirk Cousins if we were to do that. And you know my thoughts on how to do that. But if you have determined that he is your franchise guy, making it long-term guaranteed is probably an agreeable option. But you also, I would hate to be, hey, we've got $60 million tied up in Kirk Cousins, and it was year one, and we went 7-9, and now we don't like him. That would suck.
How's it worked for Detroit with Stafford, highest paid player in the league? They
go 8-8 every year.
Pardon me?
They go 8-8 every year. It's really easy.
I know it doesn't do a damn thing. If you're Aaron Rodgers, you can give him that contract and then save enough money to protect him, and you'll probably, make the playoffs every once in a while. But this is it's getting out of hand. These numbers that you're talking about, Kirk Cousins and Garoppolo, he's played 12 games, fine, he's got a good record, but I don't care. It just the whole economics of it is so out of whack, especially at the quarterback position. That's why I want them to stay. Get a hometown. I want them to sign. What's his name? Case Keenum, and then bring Teddy in on a proven contract and say, if you beat him out, we're going to give you all these incentives and that so that you'll be happy as well. And
I'd love that.
That's got to be what they have to have in mind.
I do think that a prove-it contract for Teddy Bridgewater is what's going to happen.
It has.
And whatever else accompanies that is up to speculation and is very fun to talk about. But I don't think any other teams are going to be really interested in Teddy. So I think Teddy's camp will really want to push to be in Minnesota, and we know what the organization thinks of Teddy. So it does seem like all the pieces are aligned for him to get a very palpable prove-it contract in Minnesota.
So do you? Well, first of all, I think you guys are forgetting that Kirk Cousins would also get like a free Chevy truck as the MVP of the Super Bowl, but we don't need to talk about
that. Will never happen. I will bet you anything right now that Kirk Cousins will never win a Super Bowl.
You're crushing Joe. You realize that, don't you?
Well, I'm just saying that it's his. If I knew
we need to add responsibility to these takes.
If he was coming, well, first of all, I was kidding, but second of all, if he was coming here, I would feel comfortable making any number of bets. But
you don't win Super Bowls by throwing picks in the red zone.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I don't know. I saw that article, Joe. I had read it earlier in the day, and it was, I saw it in that article, the SI article about Cousins would be a great fit here, and they said something I saw elsewhere, and I guess I don't know. It must be what Luke's talking about, where the Vikings could, throw that money at him and still be able to retain all their other players, and it's got to be that kind of thing.
You can pay a quarterback and retain all your players. It definitely works out. Somebody, I forget his name, but somebody at Over the Cap basically did that exercise and said if you pay $25 million at the quarterback position, you can extend Barr and Kendricks and Hunter and Diggs and still be fine to sign your rookies. But if you are spending $25 million at the quarterback position, someone's going to outbid you for Kirk Cousins and get him over you.
Gee, that's insane. That's just insane.
Yeah, I know he fumbles a lot. I just feel like...
Bring it up with John Elway.
With the players we got in place on offense, I just feel like he would be such a step up over what we have. But I guess my point there was that with Teddy, I was just going to ask you, Luke, if you read into any of the stuff from the postseason, like with him not being on the roster or Sam Bradford being on the roster over him, if you think that is an indicator of the team's confident. I know what you're going to say, obviously, but
I think they went with the guy who was in training camp with them, and Sam Bradford had practiced with the team far more often, and also obliterated the Saints in Week 1, so it made sense that he was the active guy. I don't think so. I also don't know what Sam Bradford's injury situation just seems so much more gloomy than Teddy Bridgewater's, but that's pure speculation just from reading the tea leaves.
When you look at him, see them jumping past Teddy in the playoffs, you got to think they obviously have confidence in his knee being able to hold up for the last couple of games, but I don't know. We don't hear enough. They never say enough, and we have no idea. So, it's really going to be tough to watch Sam Bradford, who's got a little bit better arm than these other two quarterbacks on the team, and a little more accurate. And as a pocket passer, can't run, but go watch him play for Buffalo or the Jets and see him light things up if they have a good offensive line. I don't know.
He's going to go to Arizona. That's what all the whispers are. That Arizona's
I could
really
see
interested
them
in Sam
saying
Bradford.
if it was a 6-game stretch, it might be different. But they're basically saying, well, he can hold up for a game if he needs to, and let alone, wouldn't be the full game either. It'd be
saying
couple
that.
quarters. I'm just saying the decision to put him in the playoffs was more of a single game decision than a stretch decision. So that made sense also. My only fear with Teddy, and this has been a long-term thing with me that I've brought up, and I always kind of disclaim it by saying I think he's changing the way he throws the ball, but I go back to, despite the number of 7-7s that he had in his system, Tommy Kramer at the interview that we did, Joe, or that you did, since I sat in awkward silence the entire time, talking about Teddy's throwing motion and the fact that he's a sidearm thrower, and he's also not very tall, which makes sidearm throwing worse. Looking at that and the problems he had down the field with Mike Wallace and connecting and getting air into the ball, and basically Tommy Kramer just said he throws the ball wrong, and he's never going to be more than a possession guy that doesn't really hit people down the field. I think he was working on that. But Luke, is that? I bring it up only because
Nick's article.
There you go.
Nick wrote about this. On Purple PTSD, he did a video, a cut up of every deep throw Teddy Bridgewater did in the 2015 season. You can go to Purple PTSD and watch that video. It's 9, almost 10 minutes long, of every single one from relevant all 22 angles, coach's tape. It's a coach's cut up. And then he charted the routes. It was interesting, really, really interesting to look at that, because I do think the throwing motion has an impact on Teddy's on the routes that he struggled with. The routes that he struggled with were wheel routes, fades, and seam routes. All of those have a lot more to do with vertical accuracy than horizontal accuracy. I think he has. I think he can whip power outs, which are deeper outs, a 10 yard or a 15 yard out takes a lot of arm strength, and he's been able to place those and time those perfectly. So I would say it's more of a throwing motion issue, making him struggle to touch on deep vertical accuracy, than it is an arm strength issue, and the throwing motion issue is a lot more fixable. And I think that's actually probably the best thing I've heard in all of the 2 years of debating about Teddy. The best way to characterize his flaws came in that article.
And it's on Vikings territory, really not Purple PTSD.
Oh, it's on Vikings territory. My bad.
Yeah, and
you should talk about the new writers that are at both places.
Yeah. Oh, that was my segue. Luke destroyed it, and now I hate him as a person. But no, we're super excited about that. Nick Olson is World on Reddit, and a lot of people who follow that know that he's kind of the king of the Vikings subreddit over there. So he's
subreddit.
There you go. Right. You get it. He's like Captain America in the Avengers. I got that reference. So no, yeah, he's on board, and we got over on Purple PTSD. We recruited a whole bunch of new writers that we're super excited about. Stephen Nolan, a Brad Attack is what he goes by. They'll be writing lots of stuff. But yeah, I thought that Teddy, really see the conclusion that he had come to, but if that's if it's a positive one, then I guess I can't. I might have joined Team Teddy, the group on Vikings territory that seems to be getting larger and larger. I don't know, guys. I mean,
let him play a whole game. See how his knee holds up. See how his brain holds up. They're all rushing at him live bullets. Can't make any determination. It doesn't go any further than me. I don't even need to see the numbers or his throwing motion or anything. Just how is this guy going to do after this devastating injury? Still don't know.
Yeah, the uncertainty surrounding him, this goes back to what I said earlier in the show. The uncertainty surrounding him makes it that if you're going to sign him to a prove-it contract, you also need to acquire a safety net. Like, Case Keenum would be an awesome safety net. I'm okay with A.J. McCarron or Josh McCown as one, but you need, maybe not a draft pick because those guys have just as low a floor because there's just as much uncertainty. But I think if you're going to give Teddy a decent shot to be a starter, you have to give him someone to beat in competition just to prove that, yeah, he can still play at this level.
And
we just don't know.
What did you find? And I know that you did some, and you referenced this earlier, but were you able to determine anything one way or the other on McCarron? I know he's got about as much snap time as Garoppolo did before he got.
He has like 4 games. But he to me, I went through a little bit of his film. I'm not done going through his film, so I could change my mind on this later. But from what I saw, he's a kind of guy that can make some throws very well. He's very good to the sideline, and then he makes some throws very poorly. And he was also put in that Cincinnati offense in a one-read offense because he was the backup and he was still young, and Hugh Jackson didn't trust him and doesn't trust anyone. And
yeah,
or
anyone. Yeah.
But so he was in a single-read offense. So his progression in those Cincinnati games was, is your guy there? Okay, then check down. If the check down isn't there, run. And that's about all he was asked to read. So it's hard to know if he would be able to actually lead an offense as a starter. Probably one of the better backups in the league, though. It's kind of like how we classified Case Keenum last year. When we signed him in April, and we were like, yeah, he's probably one of the better backups. Cool. That's kind of how I would feel if we got A.J. McCarron, although it seems like Hugh Jackson is still obsessed with him, which is hilarious because he doesn't trust him. But he's a football guy, so, get the analytics out of there. Instead, just don't make decisions. But that sounds like it's going to up his price tag a little bit just because you're going to be bidding with Cleveland that wants him way more than we will.
And they got $120 million in cap space.
Right, so they could pay him $6 million, and then I think if you're the Vikings, you're like, never mind. That's not what we're going to do for the backup quarterback position. Because I don't think he would legitimately challenge any of the other guys on the list. I think he would be like a good backup, but a backup.
And Joe, I know we've talked about this before, but I don't think we highlight enough the fact that you have a press pass and you actually get to talk to these players on a regular basis. Did you, during the course of the season, pick up any weird vibes from Case in regards to, just the way that he wasn't really handed the starting job for a really long time, or some of the stuff that Zimmer said in the playoffs that people, I think we've determined on the show, kind of twisted into a weird way to maybe encourage him as a way to explain away Zimmer's verbal diarrhea when he talks to the press. I mean, I'm asking that just because I wonder how much Keenum really feels loyal to this team if they weren't that loyal to him in the first place.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, because I think he certainly, there's the guy that had been a backup for how many years. He was on a prove-it basis just everywhere he went. And he finally got the opportunity, and he dug in and went after it. I think he bristled each week, but not in a bad way. When he was asked, are they going to name you starter? And he'll say, I'll say what I did last week. He knew it was coming, and it didn't seem to really bother him because I think he probably knew behind the scenes what was up. And I don't think he was, mad that Zimmer was handling it that way. You always heard all this good things about what a great teammate Teddy was, and you could pick up a vibe from once in a while that, Teddy really wanted his opportunity, and when you started to see it going away, I'm not going to say he became a jerk, but his demeanor changed a little bit. And I remember, before the before Bradford was named ahead of him as backup for the playoff game, I almost ran into Teddy. I mean, we've said this on the show. I'd walk into the stadium, and he looked down. He looked really down. So he knew at that time that he wasn't starting. So I think that's kind of what feeds him as far as saying he wants to start somewhere, and I think he really wants to, and he's been a good soldier up until this point. But I think things would change next year, And so I would love to see a camp competition between those two and really see what happens. But, I don't think I don't know how you keep them both here. You can only give, unless you tag Keenum and say, okay, this is what we're going to pay you, and then, you got to battle for the job or whatever. But, that would probably piss him off too. So I don't know. It's a hard thing to read. And I thought, everything Keenum was saying during the playoffs and the people shoveling his walk and all, he loved it here and he really felt wanted here. And now we have this big break where nobody can talk to anybody, or I guess they can probably talk, but nothing's happening but speculation. For me, it just erodes at it. So I guess that's a long way of saying I really don't know, Joe.
Yeah.
Wake up, guys. Wake up.
Well, it's just a lot of uncertainty, man. And uncertainty is fun for off-season nonsense. But at the same time, we're going to have to cover this team week to week next year. And I just fear that the decision might not be the right one, just based on.
What do you think? What do you think is the right one? I mean, how do you know that? I mean, we all know.
I genuinely believe in the Kirk Cousins move. I do. I think that
that's the right one. You don't know that.
I look at it. I look at it as like an emotional probability. So, do I genuinely think that the Vikings with Case Keenum would accomplish what they did this season, considering all just the crazy things that happened in regards to injuries and how the NFC? There's only a few teams left after this disastrous season. The Vikings could have played at home in the Super Bowl. The Eagles destroying them as is with a backup quarterback, and they're getting their MVP level quarterback back. I think that the Vikings need to keep up if it's in lieu of their future. I'm okay with that because I feel like this is a team that has the feeling that they have something special. The Sam Bradford move showed that, we're not going to eat another season because of what we did with like AP's injury or this Teddy injury. They went for it with Sam Bradford, and it worked for a little bit, and then, ignoring the offensive line got back to him. But I feel that Kirk Cousins is not Tom Brady. I don't think he's that great. I've never really said that he's like a top 3 guy.
Yeah, let me ask
Glad we clarified that.
Joe.
Well, I don't think that. To be honest, I mean I think people are getting that connotation from me that I'm saying like, oh, Kirk Cousins means Super Bowl. I think Kirk Cousins means a much better chance at a Super Bowl than Teddy Bridgewater.
Let me put it to you this way, Joe. Let me ask this.
I agree with that.
The other day, I thought it was kind of interesting. Say the Vikings sign Kirk Cousins, and is he still so where does he rank in quarterbacks in the division?
In the division, I would more look at it as where would this offense rank against the other offenses. I think we'd have the best offense in the NFC North for sure. I mean,
I think he'd be third.
I mean, the Lions are the Lions, and saying that Stafford's the reason they're 8-8 is to me is the same thing as saying, well, look at
Stafford is the reason they're 8-8 and not 2-14.
Okay,
he's just also paid a lot.
Yeah,
and also their management is terrible. And
there
so
you go.
Coaching.
So that's what
that.
I wanted to tie that into people saying, well, I've heard this from people face to face. You got to look. Well, Washington ran them out of town. Doesn't that tell you something? And it doesn't really tell me anything, just because it's the Redskins and they suck.
Also, Alex Smith is a pretty stark upgrade by pretty much any way you want to measure that, and he's only getting better in age. Alex Smith is like in the prime of his career. That was definitely a move to upgrade. Here's what I'll say about it.
I don't think so, though.
I think you want the. I mean, that's a different debate, but I think with the Vikings, you want the highest ceiling you can get and the highest floor you can get, and I don't really care if you have to go with 2 different people to get that done.
Okay, well, I'm arguing that Kirk Cousins is the highest ceiling, just based on what he did.
I can't abide that.
Why, though? I mean,
I know that he throws interceptions in the red zone and on third down. He's horrible under pressure, and he doesn't read the field very quickly at all. It'd be horrible with John DeFilippo, who wants to introduce complexity. You have to simplify your offense a lot for a guy who cannot read the field quickly and completely just, falls apart under pressure. I mean, I could show you the tape, but this is an audio medium.
Well,
and what do you think about DiFilippo's comments about how good he thinks Kirk Cousins is?
Yeah.
You think he
said that about like every quarterback he was asked about.
I know. That's my point. It's like, the higher
what these guys say right now is not like going to be an indication of what the front office is going to do. And here's the thing with Cousins, like we see how sensitive he is to his surroundings, right? And to his circumstance. We have an incredibly difficult schedule. So people who say, well, he had a tough schedule in 2017, was going to have a tough one again because we have a ridiculous schedule. And
who do we play?
We have to go into Philadelphia, into New England, into Los Angeles. Those are 3 very difficult games, not to mention the tough divisional stuff. It's a brutal schedule. But like, here's the deal with Cousins. He does what does he elevate? And what I don't understand about Cousins is, people will cite his box score stats all the time, and box score stats don't mean anything. But what does he do
though
on the field that excites you? He doesn't throw a particularly quick ball. He doesn't have a particularly strong arm. He's not really any more accurate than the average person to any level of the field. Oh, and by the way, he's terrible at certain levels of the field. Like, what makes him better?
I just don't know how he got to.
He's good.
I just don't know how he got to 5,000 yards if he's
he had Jordan Reed and Deshaun Jackson.
They also didn't have a running game either.
Yeah, but I mean, that's my argument is because he had those great players. We have those great players though, and Case Keenum didn't get to that level this year, and we have a running game, so I don't think he'll get to 5,000 yards, but I bet he'll get to 4,500. I bet he'll get to 25 to 30 touchdowns.
But that won't win you games. 4,500 yards is nice for a fantasy stat, but we don't take fantasy stats into our quarterback evaluations. We're actually trying to win games.
Why wouldn't a system guy who has good numbers when he plays with good players not win games?
Because I understand, he doesn't elevate those players.
My thing is that
why the yards don't do it.
But he doesn't. He's got 81 touchdowns to 30 interceptions in the last 3 years. I don't see this guy that completely melts down, and I don't think the rest of the league does. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in giving him that much money. I know.
You might want to watch some tape then, because it's a guy that melts down under pressure, and he takes more hits than he needs
12
to
times
take.
a year, though.
He's not
right?
elusive at all.
So
what?
If he's going to throw 2.5 times as many touchdowns to interceptions, I get that there's instances.
These box score stats, man, they're not. They don't correlate to anything.
But if you only watch 12 negative plays, you're going to say that he's a negative. Those are negative.
Do you think I only watched 12 negative? plays?
I think that you are.
Is that what you think I did?
No, I think
I'm genuinely curious.
Well, if you let me answer, I think you're putting too much weight on 12 interceptions against 30 touchdowns.
I'm not talking about just the picks. I'm talking about the things that could have been picks if they had been tipped a different direction, and I'm talking about the plays that were broken because, if I'm watching a play and I see pressure come and then he doesn't get out of it and he throws
if a competent quarterback
if
a competent quarterback played for the Redskins with Garcon and Deshaun's, he throws for 8,000 yards and 50 touchdowns.
No, he probably throws for a similar amount of yards and they win 3 more games.
That doesn't
make sense. Yards don't mean anything.
They kind of do.
Absolutely not. Yards don't lead to wins really at all. They just are yards. Empty yards are a thing because you can get 75 yards, go down to the 2, and then throw a pick.
Then he'd have more picks per 100 yards thrown or something. And he's never gotten above 12 interceptions in the 3 seasons that he's basically the last 3 seasons. 12 is the highest number. So to me, I don't look at.
He leads the league in interceptions under pressure.
Okay.
And he's going to be under pressure. We're not going to have the offensive line that he got in Washington.
Why can't we improve the offensive line in the draft?
Because we're paying all our money to Kirk Cousins.
It's the draft.
You're going to just draft a whole offensive line? We have.
That's what we did last
people
season.
Who are already expensive, and we're not going to get 2 starting quality guards in the draft unless you want to draft literally nothing else. We're not getting 2. We're not drafting 1 in first and second round interior offensive line. That won't happen.
Well, we just talked about 2 weeks ago trading down and getting 2 guards with JR.
No, we talked about trading down and getting 2 picks, but he wouldn't have wanted to double dip into offense.
Okay. Well, either way, we massively improved the offensive line in the draft last year. I think we can add one more guy and be a lot better. I just don't see.
We were still top 10 in pressure allowed. Like,
yeah, but
Case Keenum was under more pressure than most of the league, even though we drastically improved or whatever.
I mean, they ignored the offensive line since 2012. It's still an improvement over the disaster.
They still got it.
Yeah, no, it was an improvement, but let me put it this way: Diggs and Thielen are great. This is not the quarterback situation that Washington was.
So
they have a way better offensive cast in 2015 and 2016 when Kirk Cousins actually had the years that he put up the best stats. Because this year, 2017, his stats were like super mediocre by most measures.
Well, he lost
was pretty
both his
inefficient.
wide receivers, though.
Right, because he lost a bunch of. So if you want to compare like what he looks like with a good supporting offensive cast, 2016 and 2015 in Washington were a lot better than what the Vikings will have in 2018.
Okay, and so I was going to ask you, would you, just all money being equal, for every quarterback that's been rumored, who would be your pick, including Kirk Cousins?
It wouldn't be Kirk. It would probably be Case and Teddy. If I could take his knee away, Sam Bradford would probably be involved in that too, but I think it would be at least Teddy Bridgewater, and then maybe Case Keenum. I could swallow Josh McCown. Maybe I would take Kirk Cousins in a floor role. I'll take his floor.
It sounds like I want to swallow Kirk Cousins.
Wow.
I just think he's Sam Bradford without the injury history, and that makes me happy.
He's absolutely not Sam Bradford without the injury history. Sam Bradford can throw the ball to every level of the field and every spot on the field. Kirk Cousins can't throw a slant.
I don't know where all these yards came from.
When he can't throw a slant.
Well, that's a question. I just don't see how you can get to that level of production and be so bad once you get to the red zone. You think you get to the red zone more often than not.
Let me ask you this. How do you get to that level of production and then go like 6-10? How does that happen?
What
does
all the
that
time.
Season look like?
A bad defense? No running game, like Joe said? You can't say that if a quarterback has 5,000 yards and they're 6-10 that it's the quarterback's fault.
Oh, I absolutely can.
So in every game, every time he had to throw a touchdown, he threw either an interception or they had to kick a field goal, and then the defense held up, and then he got a bunch of yards, got into the red zone, threw a bunch of interceptions, but he only had 12. Like that.
There's a lot of plays. There's a lot of plays out there, and you'll see this from a lot of the media that's like analyzing Cousins. There were a lot of plays for Washington this last year where he took pressure he didn't necessarily have to by maybe. Not reading the field. Like his second read was open, but he didn't get there fast enough, and then he had to escape pressure, and then the play was broken. That kind of thing happens all the time. Doesn't really show up on the box. There's so much that quarterbacks do that don't show up in 4,500 yards. I can't believe I have to convince you that total yards don't mean anything.
That's not my point. My point is that if you follow your logic to the natural conclusion that he's just like putting up all these like garbage time yards or yards that don't mean anything, then he would be turning the ball over a lot more in the red zone because yards.
Not necessarily.
Where are the yards coming from then? I don't get that.
Drives that didn't end in points. There's lots of ways for drives to get yards and then not end in points.
Then where did the touchdowns come from?
I mean,
he's had over 80
really
touchdowns.
Mean that you're good.
Okay. Well, I mean, I want a quarterback that can, on this team, be inserted and arguably put up 5,000 yards if needed, 25 touchdowns to 30 touchdowns, and maybe 10 interceptions. I don't care about any of those numbers. I do.
None of those mean anything. They don't mean wins.
With this defense, and this support, I mean, it just seems like the argument is, okay, he was good a couple years ago because he had those wide receivers, and he didn't elevate them because they didn't have a good record. He didn't have the complete team that the Vikings have, though, so then it's just like a shifting argument to the next thing, and nothing adds up to the fact that, like...
There's a lot of noise in all of that information, which is why you just look at it. There's a lot of empirical evidence that you can use, and I'm trying not to go too deep into, like, the crazy analytics like QBR and stuff, because I know people don't really trust all that.
Already lost me on playing Words with Friends. Just wanted to let you know.
Well, he's got a good quarterback rating though too. And he's had pretty good completion percentage. I mean, he damn near 70%.
These are the worst numbers. Completion percentage doesn't matter. We just learned this last year.
I'm just saying.
Completion percentage
I'm just
means
saying
nothing, 'cause it can
when
be
all those things
manufactured.
add up to what something you're saying doesn't happen. That's not how football works, though. It's like I just don't get how all these yards and touchdowns thrown lead to you saying he doesn't throw touchdowns. I mean, where these touchdowns don't matter? Why don't they matter then? Because
They don't matter for one because I can explain why touchdowns don't matter in the general context.
Did I just hear that? I can explain why touchdowns don't matter.
Let's do this if you're going to laugh at me. Let's do this. So, touchdowns are completely irrelevant to quarterback evaluation because, for one, come on, you know what context we're talking in here.
I know.
Context.
What, that they're all garbage touchdowns?
No, for the love of God. For one, the context is super important. For two, you can't really look at the number of touchdowns and make any sort of this has been proven time and time again that they don't correlate to winning. Passing touchdowns and winning have passing touchdowns and future winning. I'm sorry. You win games where you had more touchdowns in them, but if you throw 25 touchdowns in one season, it actually means absolutely no indication that you're going to throw 25 touchdowns in the next season. So there's actual correlational data. I can find you the articles and everything and send them to you later.
I would agree with that.
But also, it's just
what's the context though?
Why are you taking a passing season where he threw 500 times and evaluating it on 14 or 25 plays? You're just losing so much information. Not to mention, there's a lot of noise.
Isn't that what you're doing? That's exactly what you're doing. You're looking at play.
I'm taking the entire body of his work, and I'm also taking tendencies and things that don't necessarily show up in a box score, and trying to talk about them. It's he's bad under pressure, and he threw touchdowns anyways, and that doesn't mean that him being bad under pressure just doesn't matter.
I didn't say that. I didn't say he's perfect. That's why I said he's not Tom Brady. I'm just saying that I don't know what that means when you say, well, yeah, he had a lot of yards, but there's context to it, and then you just move on. What's the context? That he had good players around him? Well,
yards after the catch is context. Scheme is context.
The Vikings don't have that, though? Don't the Vikings have good yak receivers, good receivers in general, a great running game?
If you're going to make an argument that any quarterback is good, why are we going after the most expensive one?
My argument is saying
marketable skills.
My argument from the beginning has been that he is the best quarterback to plug into a system and win. Not that it's just a good system and anyone would do well. I mean, that's kind of the opposite of what I'm saying.
Let me flip that around on you then. If you think, so you think he's the best quarterback that you can plug into this system and then win a Super Bowl in without using something that I can find on an ESPN box score, why?
So you're saying to me, don't use any of his stats.
No,
to justify your argument because I have 6 examples of him freaking out, and I will say.
Why is it just 6? No, this is something that happens consistently and all the time. I can find you one in every game.
I just don't know how a stats guy can tell me that the stats don't matter unless they're the stats that you choose. That's you're defending cherry picking. Every stat.
No, I'm using the ones that are good.
Every stat.
I always fight against total yards.
Okay, so why do you like Teddy then?
Because total yards don't matter, and touchdowns don't matter.
What did Teddy do?
He was better in fourth quarter and on third downs than Kirk Cousins. But pretty much any way you want to measure better, whether it's watching or looking at stats or anything, in the fourth quarter and on third downs, which are the most indicative situations. Not only are they the most predictive, analytically, if you wanted to actually do that math, it's also just on third and long. It's a kind of an equalizer because on 1st and 10, scheme will make things a lot more different. On 3rd and long, everyone's calling the same plays. So it's kind of an equalizer, which makes it a lot better to compare quarterbacks for. Teddy's a lot better in those situations. He's had less volume. You're using volume stats, man.
So what are the good stats?
Yeah.
Love QBR, love DVOA. I love total adjusted yards per play for quarterbacks. I love intelligent splits, like 3rd and long, 4th down, spots on the field. That's all available with Pro Football Focus. Things like yards after the catch. Things like there are ways to measure supporting cast. Things like how much pressure you were under, if you want to talk about supporting cast stuff, which I do think that it's fair to give Kirk Cousins a little credit. in spite of his supporting cast, because I don't think he's like Deshaun Kaiser or like Brock Osweiler or whatever.
How much would you pay him?
Around between 18 and 19 million a year.
And you'd be happy to have him on your team at that number?
I wouldn't, but I think that's his actual value. I mean, I don't want him to be the Vikings quarterback. I don't think he would. I don't think he would approve upon what we did in 2017. I don't think he would approve upon Case Keenum's season, just mostly by virtue of pressure.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're not going to agree on it. I think I do think this team is like one or two pieces away from being on the Eagles level, just in terms of, you know, everything. I mean, I think the line's going to improve. I think that they can get a type of playmaker that I was talking about earlier that just comes in every once in a while. Like, I do want them to keep McKinnon. I was bringing him out for that reason, but I just think he's a better quarterback than Case Keenum. I don't think Keenum's gonna. I just worry that Keenum's not gonna repeat what he did this year. I think that was like a magical thing. And
I don't think he would either.
You know, as a thing with like averages and stuff, I just don't see it. I to be honest, without Kirk Cousins, I would go with Bridgewater. As much as I've been an anti-Bridgewater guy, I don't trust Bradford. You know, he's not gonna make it for more than a quarter of the season.
But you trust Bridgewater.
I feel like I have to. You know, I don't. Like I said, I don't think Keenum's gonna do it again. I don't think Bradford can do it. I wish he could. That's the big argument for me with Cousins. I just think he's gonna maybe not produce at the level of that Saints game, but he'll stay healthy and whatever. It doesn't matter. I just feel like
we're draft another quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's Teddy, and I don't think Keenum would stick around to compete. I think he probably thinks personally that he did enough to solidify that job, and he'll go elsewhere and get paid more.
There's a lot more money for him in other franchises.
Yeah, so. Outside of the fact that me and Luke hate each other, I wanted to.
That was fun.
No, it's, you know, that's what it's all about.
If anybody's still listening.
We still have about 10 minutes left.
I am, unfortunately.
Poor Joe. God, you picked the wrong guy to mentor. I'll tell you that. I don't remember what happened in the last podcast, but there was a point where Joe looked at me and goes, "This is the guy I hitched my wagon to," and I just said, "Yeah." Luke wrote an amazing punter article. He does it every year. He no longer works for us, but it was a good swan song for him. Real quickly, one of the people that listened to the show was giving me feedback this week, and he said it's like listening to friends like in like a man cave talk about the team, and I feel like we kind of got there, but it also explains why I don't have any friends, I think. But Luke, I read your article, and I wanted to look at it in the context of when we had Chris Cluey on the show. Full disclosure, Cluey is like a savant at certain things, which is the definition of the word savant, and he wrote the algorithm for punting stats on PFF, I believe.
He helped. He contributed. He was part of the team.
And so I wanted to just juxtapose yours against that. Like, what does yours look at differently?
And he also liked Luke's punting story last year.
Yeah, he came across it like organically, which is a big reason that he did the show in the first place. So that's how big this article is. Yeah, like
that's the last nice thing we're saying about Luke for the rest of the show.
Totally.
That's fine. I deserve that.
Like explain like how you approach it differently.
Yeah, so net punting yards isn't like very indicative of anything, because when you're punting from different levels on the field, you're aiming for different distances. Like the total difference doesn't, like the total distance doesn't like actually mean you punted well. Like a 30-yard punt is actually a really good kick if you did it from your opponent's 45 and you landed it within the 20. That's a pretty good kick. Whereas like it's really bad if you did it from your own 10. So I split the field into long field and short field punts, because at a certain point far back you're just trying to boot it as far as possible, and then use your like average yards per punt from there. But then on the short fields, it's the percentage of the field that you covered. So if you were kicking from midfield and you landed it on the 10, that's an 80% kick, and then you average all the kicks out from that, and you can get a pretty good ranking by combining those two together. This time I weighted it a little bit toward longer punts, just because those are a lot more frequent. People don't really punt from like field goal range very often, but
Kirk Cousins does.
But yeah, so that's how I got that ranking. There's some interesting quirks, though. This is something that Kluwe brought up when he came on the podcast to talk about it last year, is hang time is a big missing variable, and I just don't have that data. I wish I did. I would incorporate it if I did, but that's not something that people really track anymore. And even when they do, it's like really inaccurate because it's like a guy with a stopwatch that could miss by a whole quarter second, and that like really matters. So I wish I had that. That's why like Ryan Quigley, the Vikings punter, he ranked 7th on PFF grades, and the Vikings led the league in fair catches forced, which I think is a really good indicator that, hey, he's popping the ball way up in the air, but he's not getting a lot of distance. He was like, I think, bottom 10 in distance. He was a little bit better at the short field punts. He was like middle of the league, but he ended up being in the bottom 5 of all punters. So I don't know if that formula is really telling the whole story about him, just because I think hang time is so big. And we listened to Kluwe talk about how Prefer really cares about hang time a lot too. And he's all about, pop it up high, and we don't care about distance as much. So there's definitely a good case to be made for guys like that. But otherwise, there were some really interesting things. Johnny Hecker, who kind of everybody fawned over as the best punter, ranked, I think, 6th under guys like, the kind of usual suspects like Marquette King. Shane Leckler got the punting title. That was kind of an interesting winner because he had been kind of in the middle of the pack for the last couple of years. The Packers have gone through 3 bad punters in the last 3 years, which is fun. Jeff Locke was doing okay before he left for Sam Martin, who was clearly not healthy. And Sam Martin got, for the Lions, was number 33 out of 33 punters.
So who was the best?
Shane Leckler was the best.
Okay.
Houston.
Because I saw the guy down in Dallas talk about the list also.
Yeah, RJ Ochoa, who writes for a Dallas Cowboy blog, he wrote an article kind of citing mine, which was really cool. He's very excited. Chris Jones ranked very well. He's the Cowboys punter, so he's excited about that.
So what are you guys going to be writing? Do you have any idea what you're going to be covering this next week? Because I have a feeling I'll be talking about quarterbacks.
I'm going to do a article about this discussion that just went on the show.
About the schism.
Yeah,
yes, the schism on
tearing us apart. And I know what's going to happen. Cousins is going to end up in like Buffalo, and he's going to have like 3,200 yards, and I'm going to be ashamed of myself.
He'll go to the Jets, and then it won't work out because they won't surround him with the talent they need to.
$60 million contract.
At some point,
age that we live in.
At some point, that's got to make a difference. You pay somebody that much money, and that's going to hurt you somewhere. At some point, if you don't, you got to sign other players. My goodness, I don't get it. I don't know enough about the economics.
Chris Carter was like a big advocate of the $60 million deal because he's like, you need a quarterback to. He was saying if you don't have Cousins, you're going to be 2-14. If you do, you can like suddenly contend for a playoff spot, which I didn't think made a lot of sense. But he was all for it. Yeah, I don't think that it has ever worked doing it back. I think they're doing it backwards. I think the Vikings have done it the right way. We just have bad luck with quarterbacks, and who knows? Like I said, I'll begrudgingly support Teddy. He's a nice guy, and I want him to succeed. But that's what's going to happen. I'm sure of it. So anyway,
just Johnny Manziel. That's all I'm saying.
Oh
yeah, we didn't even get to that. Thankfully, I was gonna. No,
we're never talking about Johnny Manziel. Unless he enters the actual NFL officially. I refuse.
Yeah, that would have been the funnest devil's advocate of my entire life. I would have heard your guys' nosebleeds. That's a good plug for Vikings territory. We do have both Joe and Luke writing there now. It's you can catch our articles there and catch them on Purple PTSD first. It's kind of a fun way to let people know. Since the response on Reddit was, you bought Vikings territory? Sad face. I made up a sad face, but I could feel it. But yeah, check us out. We got a lot of stuff going on, and we're always going to be available on our social media accounts, on Facebook at Purple PTSD, and at Vikings Territory, and at Viking Territory, and Vikings Territory, or Purple PTSD, sorry, on the Twitter machine, and we might have a new writer that is big on Instagram, which is something that confuses me because I'm old, but I think we need to start delving into. But wanted to thank everyone, too, for listening to the show, making it this far. We take a lot of pride in this show, again, despite the evidence to the contrary, so it means a lot to us. But that's been this episode of the Purple Journal Podcast. Check in next week, and we have a new co-host. I'm kidding. And Skol.